The first thing I remember about that morning is the sound of pens clicking. Not one pen but many. A polite rhythm that filled the space like a small mechanical choir. The walls were glass, so clear that the ocean looked closer than it really was. From this high above the cliff the waves seemed rehearsed, each one folding into the next with obedient grace. Someone had decided this meeting room needed a view. Someone else decided I should sit at the far end of the table, where the air conditioning hummed a little louder. The realtor kept smiling the way professionals do when they are paid by the hour. He gestured toward the document stack, all white edges and gold clips. I noticed the reflection of sunlight moving along the marble tabletop, thin and trembling, as if even light felt nervous here. Daniel was standing near the center, my only child, speaking to a cluster of lawyers who nodded without listening. Amelia sat beside him, legs crossed, manicured nails resting on her phone like small weapons. When she finally looked up, her eyes paused on me, not unkindly, but distantly, the way one might look at a forgotten coat left on a chair. "Mother, we just need your signature," she said. Her voice was soft, measured, coated in the sugar of control. "Once this is done, everything else falls into place." I could taste the coffee they had served earlier, lukewarm and bitter, but I kept my cup untouched. The paper in front of me smelled faintly of ink and arrogance. The top page bore my name printed neatly above a line. Sylvie Sparks, grantor of power of attorney. Power of attorney. Such a heavy phrase for such a small space. Daniel glanced my way. "Mom, it's straightforward. You sign, the closing goes through, and we all move forward. You've read this before." His tone tried for patience but landed somewhere between command and apology. I wanted to ask him if he remembered the last time we spoke without a contract between us. I wanted to remind him that moving forward sometimes means leaving people behind. But I said nothing. Silence is cheaper than argument, and it buys more time. I traced one finger along the line that waited for my name. My handwriting used to be steady. Now it shook just slightly, enough for people to think it meant weakness. Let them think it. Weakness is the most convincing disguise. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sparks, would you like me to summarize the key points?" he asked, kind but rehearsed. He had said that same sentence hundreds of times before, and it had never once been for someone who mattered to him. I smiled. "No need. I understand perfectly." Across the table Amelia leaned forward, her perfume filling the short distance between us. "It really is for your benefit," she said. "This way you won't have to worry about any property taxes or transfer fees. Daniel and I will handle all of that." Her smile was bright enough to leave shadows. For a second I saw the woman she could have been if greed hadn't made her so certain of herself. Then she turned away, and the image dissolved. A gust of wind pressed against the glass wall. The ocean flashed silver, then gray again. The realtor began to shuffle papers, eager to keep motion in the room. People like him fear stillness. Stillness means someone is thinking. I lifted my pen, felt its weight, and then set it down again. The small metallic click drew every head toward me. "Before I sign," I said quietly, "I'd like to understand why my name is still listed as titleholder if I'm not part of the transaction." A pause rippled through the group. Amelia laughed, a sound that landed too sharply. "Oh, that's just a technicality. You know how records are. Outdated systems, slow updates." I met her gaze. Outdated systems tend to keep better memory than people. Daniel exhaled through his nose, impatience hidden poorly. "Mom, please. We've gone through this. Let's not make a scene." The word scene hung between us like smoke. Everyone in the room pretended to be busy with their documents, pretending not to watch the small play unfolding at the end of the table. I almost pitied them. Almost. The realtor tried to rescue the moment. "If Mrs. Sparks has any questions, we can address them after the signing," he said. "For now, let's proceed so the notary can validate." I felt the vibration of my phone in my bag. One discreet buzz, then silence. Gracelang. The name flashed briefly on the screen before fading. No one noticed. I did not move to answer. Amelia slid the pen closer to me. "Go on," she said, her voice dipped in honey. "It's just paperwork." Paperwork. As if lives were made of pages and ink. I thought of all the times paper had defined the borders of my world. The deed to my first home, the birth certificate I signed alone, The letter from the insurance company after my husband died. Each sheet had weighed less than air, and yet changed the gravity of everything. I took the pen again and turned the document over, scanning the fine print. There, buried among the clauses, was the sentence that mattered. Full irrevocable authority over the property and its associated assets. They wanted the land, the estate, and the silence that came with it. My pulse steadied. The room narrowed until it felt like a stage and I the only actor aware of the audience. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock counting down to the moment they thought would crown them. Then the door opened. 2 men entered, one in a charcoal suit, the other holding a leather folder. Their footsteps were soft but deliberate. The realtor straightened at once, sensing a hierarchy shift. The man in gray spoke first. "Apologies for the interruption," he said. "We were told Mrs. Sparks would want to review the final set of closing documents." Amelia's smile froze. "We already have them," she said quickly. "Everything's ready." The man turned to me. "Mrs. Sparks," he said, and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect rare in rooms like this. "Per your request, we've included the amendments from the trust directive." Trust directive. The phrase sliced through the room like a quiet blade. Daniel frowned. "What trust directive?" The man ignored him. He placed the folder before me, open to the signature page. "If you choose to sign these, we'll finalize immediately under your terms." The air changed temperature. Even the sound of the ocean seemed to hold its breath. I looked down at the new documents, the logo embossed in silver. Eclipse Trust Incorporated. The letters shimmered faintly, like a secret in daylight. Eclipse Trust Incorporated. I traced the raised letters with my thumb, pretending to study them while the room tried to remember how to breathe. The logo shimmered faintly under the overhead light, a crescent within a circle small and neat. The man in gray stood patiently, his posture saying everything his mouth did not. Amelia leaned forward. "Excuse me, what exactly is this?" she asked, her smile cracking around the edges. Eclipse Trust is the legal entity holding title to the Azure Cliff parcel. All closing procedures require consent from its principal. He turned toward me again, nodding slightly. "That would be you, Mrs. Sparks." The silence that followed was not empty. It was alive, thick with disbelief and slow realization. Daniel blinked, then forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said. "This estate belongs to Ocean View Developments. We're the buyers, she's just the principal title holder." The man in gray finished. "Yes, sir. Which means your contract proceeds only under her authorization." The realtor's pen slipped from his fingers and hit the table with a soft metallic tap. The sound was enough to break the frozen tableau. Amelia turned sharply to Daniel, whispering something between her teeth. He didn't answer. He was staring at me, his expression unreadable, a thin line of anger cutting through his composure. "Mother," he said finally, low and steady. "What is this about?" I lifted my eyes to his and smiled, just enough for myself. "You told me not to worry about property matters," I said. "So I didn't. I let someone else handle them." I let that sentence hang. There was no need to say her name, Grace Lang. She would remain invisible just like we planned. Amelia's voice sharpened. "This is absurd. You're not in any position to control this transaction." The man in gray raised one brow, his tone professional but unbending. "Ma'am, the ownership records filed with the California Land Registry confirm otherwise. Mrs. Sparks' signature is the only one that can authorize or deny transfer." The air felt heavier. Even the soft hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. I could hear my own pulse slow and steady like a clock that knew it was right. Amelia's chair scraped the floor as she stood. "Daniel, say something." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, my son didn't have a script. The lawyer's words were still circling the table, and each rotation stripped another layer off the illusion they'd built together. I looked down at the contract in front of me. The lines of text swam for a moment, but I already knew every word by heart. I had read them so many times in my quiet basement, the lamp flickering beside a cup of tea, the sea whispering through the cracks in the window. I had imagined this very moment so precisely that now it felt almost gentle. "You've known all along," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "You've been playing us." I shook my head. No. I was listening. The man in gray slid the pen toward me, the one they had tried to force into my hand moments earlier. Its polished surface caught the light like a blade. "Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Sparks," he said. I didn't look at Daniel or Amelia. I looked through the glass wall at the endless gray sea. It stretched beyond everything: names, contracts, promises. I thought of the first morning I moved into their house, how the air had smelled like paint and possibility. I thought of the years that followed, of each insult filed away quietly, like coins dropped in a jar. This was simply the day I counted them. I signed. One stroke, then another, slow and deliberate. The pen glided easily, as if it had been waiting for this signature all its life. The man in gray nodded to the notary, who stamped the page with a crisp metallic thud. "Confirmed," he said. Daniel finally spoke, his voice breaking through the stunned quiet. "What did you just sign?" I placed the pen down, aligning it carefully with the folder's edge. "The final authorization," I said. "The one that determines who this estate belongs to." Amelia's eyes darted between me and the folder. "It belongs to us," she shouted. "You said you'd help us. We've already invested everything." I met her anger with calm. "And I have helped you," I said. "I made sure your names will be remembered, just not in the way you hoped." Her lips parted but no sound came. Daniel's jaw tightened, confusion warring with fury. The man in gray closed the folder and turned to me again. "Thank you, Mrs. Sparks. The Havenlight Foundation will be notified within the hour." "Havenlight," Daniel repeated, the word landing like a foreign language on his tongue. "What is that?" "A charitable foundation," I said simply, "for women who have nowhere else to go." The realization spread through the room like ink in water. Amelia stepped back, her face pale. "You gave it away," she whispered. "You actually gave it away." I stood slowly, gathering my bag. "Not away," I said. "Just somewhere it will be of use." The lawyer nodded and left quietly, followed by the notary. The realtor mumbled something about needing to make a call and slipped out as well. Within seconds, the room that had been full of voices became a chamber of silence. Daniel and Amelia stood across from me, motionless, their victory crumbling at their feet. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance in their faces. I saw loss, the kind that doesn't come from money, but from realizing you've mistaken love for weakness. "Mother," Daniel said softly, "you can't do this." "I already did." Amelia's eyes flashed with desperation. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll regret it on my own terms." I turned toward the door. My steps echoed on the marble floor, each one cleaner than the last. The elevator waited at the end of the corridor, its doors shining like a mirror. I could see my reflection as I pressed the button, older, smaller, but still there. The same woman they had dismissed, only now she was whole again. As the elevator descended, I watched the numbers change. 10, 9, 8. Each floor peeled away another layer of fear. When the doors opened, the sea air rushed in through the lobby's open windows. I inhaled deeply, letting the salt and wind fill my lungs. Outside, the world looked different. Brighter. Not softer, never that, but real. The kind of brightness that comes after a long storm when you finally see what's left standing. I walked to the edge of the terrace overlooking the cliff. The ocean below roared faintly, folding over itself in rhythm. I leaned on the railing, feeling the metal cool beneath my palms. The sky was a wash of pearl gray, the same color as the folder now lying upstairs with my name on it. People say revenge feels like fire. They are wrong. Fire burns and ends quickly. This was water, slow, patient, inevitable. For years they thought I was silent because I was afraid. They were half right. I was afraid of losing what little family I had left, of being forgotten. But fear, when you let it breathe long enough, becomes something else. It becomes precision. Behind me, I heard the elevator doors close. The sound faded into the hum of the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, sharp and brief, before disappearing into the fog. I took one last look at the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly, its surface calm again. For the first time in a long time, I felt the same way. And then I walked away. The drive home was quiet except for the waves. I could see them flickering through the windshield, their white edges flashing like distant cameras. The coastal road curved and dipped as if it were thinking about changing its mind. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the silence fill every space the radio used to occupy. It was easier that way. The house appeared at the end of the street like a memory I had once loved but no longer trusted. The paint had peeled near the porch rail, though Amelia would say it was part of the design. The windows glowed with warm light. It looked like home from far away. It always did. When I stepped inside, the air carried the faint smell of lemon cleaner and disappointment. Everything was neat, arranged by someone who believed symmetry was proof of success. The new dining table gleamed like a sheet of glass, reflecting the chandelier's small crystals. It replaced the oak table I once found at a flea market, the one I had polished every Sunday afternoon while the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen. I used to love this place. I really did. Before it began to shrink around me. First it was only small things. Amelia replaced my curtains with linen ones she said matched the color scheme. Then she moved my rocking chair into the garage because it didn't fit the aesthetic. She told guests that the family heirlooms cluttered the shelves. I tried not to take it personally. People change, styles change, homes evolve. That is what I told myself. But soon I began to notice that the walls were closing in, not physically, but in ways that couldn't be measured. My photographs disappeared from the hallway. My teapot was replaced with a sleek chrome thing that hissed instead of whistled. One morning, I found a note on the fridge written in Amelia's elegant hand. Sylvie, please remember to use your own shelf for groceries. We're tracking expenses more carefully now. That word, your own shelf, echoed louder than it should have. I stared at it until the ink blurred. I remember the evening they decided to reorganize the living room. Daniel was excited, talking about open space and light flow. I sat quietly on the couch while Amelia directed the movers. When they took away my bookshelf, she smiled as though she were doing me a kindness. You have digital versions of everything now, she said. No need for so much paper. I nodded because nodding is easier than arguing. Still that night, I stood in the empty corner where my books had been and realized something important. They weren't just books. They were proof that I had lived a life before theirs. I spent more time outside after that. The garden didn't care who paid the bills or who got the bigger bedroom. The soil only asked for patience. I planted rosemary, mint, lettuce, and a row of lavender that always caught the sunset first. The hens clucked softly, moving like gossiping old friends. Out there, under the low hum of the ocean breeze, I could almost remember who I was. One afternoon while I was pulling weeds, Amelia stepped onto the porch holding a cup of coffee and a phone pressed to her ear. She wore sunglasses though the sky was cloudy. Yes, the house is lovely, she said to whoever was listening. 3 bedrooms, ocean view. We'll renovate soon once Daniel finalizes the deal. Oh, his mother. She stays in the lower unit. Temporary arrangement. Lower unit. That was what she called my room now. I looked up from the soil. She saw me, hesitated, then turned her back and kept talking. I wanted to laugh, but laughter would have cracked something fragile inside me. Instead, I brushed the dirt from my knees and whispered to the plants. We're temporary too, I suppose. A week later I caught a cold that became a fever. It lingered until I could hardly stand. Daniel took me to the hospital, impatient but careful, as though he was performing a task for a stranger. The nurses were kind. Machines beeped softly through the nights. I dreamed of my husband's voice calling me from the garden. When I woke, only the fluorescent lights answered. When I returned home, something was different. The door to my room was locked. I stood there, suitcase in hand, too weak to shout. Amelia appeared at the top of the stairs, her face framed by perfect curls. Oh, Sylvie, you're back sooner than expected, she said. We had to rent the room. The bills were piling up. You can use the basement for now. The basement? She said it lightly, like it was a harmless suggestion. Daniel stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. He mumbled something about practicality and fairness. I stared at them both, at the staircase that used to lead to comfort, now leading nowhere. Downstairs, the air smelled of concrete and rust. The pipes hummed above me like distant bees. I placed my bag beside the old water heater and sat on the edge of a narrow cot that hadn't been there before. The mattress dipped in the middle. I stared at the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, its glow trembling as if afraid to stay on. That night, I listened to the laughter drifting from above. Glasses clinked, footsteps moved across the wooden floor. Music spilled faintly through the vents. I wrapped the thin blanket tighter around me and whispered into the dark. This house used to be mine. No one answered. But maybe the silence did. Maybe it was already planning to turn itself into something else. I woke early the next morning to the sound of the ocean. Even from the basement I could hear it. It had a rhythm that never cared about anyone's permission. I brewed instant coffee on a small hot plate, sipped it slowly, and thought about the strange comfort of invisibility. If they couldn't see me, they couldn't predict me. Later that day I went out to the backyard. The hens fluttered excitedly, as if nothing had changed. I fed them grain, felt the sun on my face, and realized I still had one thing they could never take: the space inside my own head. As I crouched near the garden bed, my fingers brushed against a loose brick by the fence. Beneath it was a small tin box, the one where I used to keep seeds. I opened it and found a folded piece of paper I had forgotten. A copy of the life insurance statement my husband left behind. The numbers were still clear. The ink hadn't faded. A quiet spark flickered through me. Not anger, not vengeance, just clarity. I closed the box, wiped the dirt away, and placed it back under the brick. I didn't need to look at it again. I only needed to remember that it was there. That night I sat on the edge of my cot and whispered to the darkness. You can take the rooms, the furniture, the walls. But you won't take my story. The basement light flickered once, then steadied. Maybe it agreed. I kept the house quiet for a week. I moved like a shadow between the basement and the garden, between the garden and the market, between the market and the basement again. I said little. I listened to everything. People tell you who they are when they think you are done listening. On a Tuesday morning I brewed tea in the basement on the hot plate and opened a small notebook. It had once been for recipes. I turned to a blank page and wrote a title across the top in a slow hand. Ledger. I wrote the first entry. The day they called my room a lower unit. I did not write long paragraphs. I wrote sentences that fit on one line. Clean cuts. No extras. The more I wrote, the more the shape of the last few years appeared, the way a negative appears in a tray of developer under red light. I did not add anger to the ink. I did not need it. Facts have their own temperature. In the afternoons I went upstairs when no one was home and stood in the doorway of the kitchen. A new stainless kettle sat where the old enamel kettle had whistled for years. The refrigerator hummed like a thing at work. I opened it and put my groceries on my shelf. My shelf. I shut the door gently and placed my palms on the cool steel. Then I went back down the stairs and added a second entry to the ledger. The day the bookshelf left and the walls began to forget me. On Thursday I took the bus into town. I wore an old navy coat that had belonged to my husband, and a scarf I had knitted during a long winter when Daniel was small and refused to sleep. The city was bright and busy. People hurried with phones in their hands and their eyes somewhere else. I walked into a bank with tall ceilings and a lobby that liked the sound of its own shoes. I asked to speak with someone in private. They gave me a glass office with a plant that had never been watered enough. The manager was young and smug, and then he read a number on a screen and became respectful. Respect has such a simple trigger in some people. He asked me if I needed cash. I told him I needed quiet. He understood and produced a form. When I left the bank, the wind had shifted and the ocean smell had moved further into the city. I stood on the corner by the bus stop and dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang twice and then I heard a familiar voice. It sounded like gravel underwater and honey poured over it. Sylvie, she said. It has been a long time. Hello, Grace, I said. There was a pause that felt like we were both looking at the same old photograph. Then she laughed softly. So, it is time. It is time, I said. We met that evening in a place that served strong tea and stubborn toast. The waiter thought we were sisters. We did not correct him. Grace wore a simple black dress and a pair of glasses that could cut through fog. She asked questions in small units and let the answers grow roots. I told her enough. I kept the parts that belonged to memory instead of money. She wrote nothing down until the end. Then she wrote 3 words on a napkin and slid it to me. Eclipse. Trust. Invisible. I smiled. Invisible does not mean gone. Exactly, she said. It means the work can breathe without an audience. We set the bones of it that night. The trust would live on paper in a place that respected privacy. It would own nothing noisy and everything essential. It would lend and it would hold. There would be other names that were not mine. Grace would stand in the light when light was useful. I would not. Decisions would move through quiet channels. No document would ever carry my full weight unless I wanted it to. She called it a lattice. I called it a fence you can see through. We parted outside under a street lamp that made a little circle of gold around our shoes. Grace put a hand on my shoulder. You waited a long time, she said. Waiting was part of the work, I said. You will need patience for the rest of it, she said. I smiled. I have more patience than furniture. We did not hug. We did not promise to call. We did not need to. There are people who occupy a permanent room in your life. You do not have to knock each time. Back at the house, I moved through rooms like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. Amelia had arranged white lilies in a glass vase on the table that replaced my oak. The lilies smelled like a hotel lobby pretending to be a home. I touched one petal with a finger and felt nothing. In the hallway, the wall where my photographs had been now held a mirror. It returned my face to me and asked a question I chose not to answer. In the basement, I opened the ledger and added a line. The day a napkin became a map. Weeks passed. The trust learned to breathe. Grace sent short messages in the morning. A seat here. A line there. No faces. No meetings. Only movement. I made deposits that did not make noise. I signed with a name that was not my own and yet belonged to me. I let paper do the walking. I let time do the heavy lifting. People think power is a voice. Often it is a drawer. At home, the house continued to contract. Amelia introduced me to her friends as a family helper. Daniel spoke about the Azure Cliff project at dinner and never noticed the way I watched the salt shaker when he mentioned deadlines. They made plans for a future that had already moved in a different direction. One night, Amelia hosted a small party for people who knew investors who knew other investors. I stayed in the kitchen preparing small plates. I heard Amelia in the living room describing the view we would have when the estate was finished. She practiced the word ours until it sounded like a prayer. A man asked about financing. Amelia laughed in her bright way. We have a silent partner. The terms are favorable. The partner will not be a problem. She looked at Daniel. He nodded. I washed my hands and dried them on a towel that had a clean hotel smell. Then I went outside through the back door and stood under the sky. The air tasted like rain. The hens had already settled on their roosts and made soft sounds that felt like forgiveness. I looked at the fence and the loose brick where the tin box slept. I did not touch it. I did not need to. Some knowledge is warmer when it stays underground. Winter light came and went. The trust grew its small branches. Grace sent a message with a single sentence. We now own the ground lease. I read it twice. Then I turned off my phone and stared at the ceiling of the basement where the pipes hummed their old metal song. I added to the ledger. The day the soil came home. When Amelia discovered a problem with their deposit schedule, she shouted on the phone to a person who kept their voice even. She walked through the rooms like a storm in heels. Daniel avoided my eyes for days. I kept cooking. I kept tending soil. I kept my mouth closed on purpose. One evening he came to the basement doorway and watched me fold laundry. Are you happy? He asked without greeting. I looked at him. That is a question you ask a child or a liar, I said. Try again. He sighed. I am asking if you are planning something. I folded a towel. Every person who underestimates another always asks that question at the wrong time. No, I said. Planning is for people who think they can manage the tide. I am doing something else. What? He said. I smiled and handed him a folded towel. I am growing a garden. He stared at the towel like it might explain me and then went upstairs. I wrote in the ledger. The day he asked the wrong question. Spring leaned in. The lavender woke first. The rosemary followed like an old friend who pretends she was not late. I watched the new leaves and let them be a calendar. The trust gathered a little more of what it needed. Grace sent a message with only 3 words. All approvals secured. I breathed out and felt the breath go all the way to the soles of my feet. I made soup and brought a bowl to the basement for later. I placed a second bowl on the counter upstairs for Amelia. She took it without thanks and said they had a final closing date. She said it like a victory. That night I sat at the small desk under the basement window and opened a folder I kept inside another folder. I reread the documents with the care of a person who irons a dress she plans to wear on the day someone bet she would not show up. My name did not appear where a casual eye would look. It lived in the spine of the pages, in the way the clauses leaned, in the direction the permissions pointed. I closed the folder and touched the cover with 2 fingers the way one might touch a bell and not ring it. Then I wrote the last line of the day. The day the silence began to speak. When I turned off the lamp, the room went very dark. Above my head, footsteps crossed the living room. Music played softly. Amelia laughed her bright laugh. Daniel answered in a tone that tried to be light and failed. The pipes hummed and the sea joined them. Everything was moving toward the day that would change their story. They did not know. That is the mercy and the curse of pride. It keeps you warm while the weather changes. I lay back on the narrow cot and listened to the rhythm of the house. Somewhere a window clicked in its frame. Somewhere a faucet dripped and then remembered not to. I closed my eyes and saw a room with glass walls and a table of marble that looked like winter. I saw a pin on a line. I saw 2 men entering with a folder that was mine. I slept like a stone in a river. The water worked on me while I did nothing. In the morning I woke smooth. I used to believe silence was a kind of defeat. I thought the person who spoke last always won. But silence has weight if you learn how to place it. After the night I finished my ledger, I began to see how stillness could tilt an entire house. The days passed with the rhythm of ritual. I cooked breakfast, tended the garden, watered the rosemary, and marked the small entries in my notebook. Each entry was a seed. She called me tenant again. He forgot my birthday but remembered a deadline. The handwriting grew tighter, like a net pulling itself closed. Grace's messages came less often but carried more force. Eclipse active. Proceeding to secondary acquisitions. I reread that one 3 times. She never said more than she needed to. I learned to read what lived between her words. One afternoon Amelia invited friends for brunch. She wore white and spoke in the tone people use when they are already certain of applause. I served them coffee and listened while they discussed market shifts and coastal property values. Someone asked where I lived. "Oh, she stays downstairs," Amelia said. "It keeps things simple." Simple. I smiled into the tray of cups. Complexity had always been my profession. After they left, I went to the garden. The sun hung low, painting every leaf in brass. I knelt near the lavender and whispered, "They think I am small." The plants did not argue. They only kept growing. That night I pulled the folder from beneath the cot and spread the pages across my desk. The trust papers had multiplied. Grace had built new layers, LLCs, holding entities, accounts with names that sounded like forgotten ships. I signed where she had marked steady hand, steady breath. There was one page she had added at the end, a draft clause authorizing the trust to purchase shares in Ocean View Developments. I traced the line with my pen and realized what she was giving me. A door into the very company Daniel worked with. The next morning I called her. "It's too soon," I said. "It's exactly soon enough," she replied. "They're expanding into Azure Cliff. You'll own 40% before anyone learns you exist." 40 is not control, I said. "It's gravity," she answered. "The kind that pulls everything else toward it." I stared at the gray light spilling across the basement floor. "And when they find out?" "They won't," she said. "Invisible things don't get found. They reveal themselves." After the call I sat with my hands open on the table. My palms looked older than I remembered. The veins were maps of rivers that had dried but still remembered the way to the sea. I thought of Daniel as a child, how he used to build castles in the sand and cry when the tide took them. He had never learned that the tide does not ask for permission. By early spring the trust owned a quiet share in everything that touched the estate project. Construction supply, legal escrow, even the staging company that would one day fill the rooms with furniture Amelia could brag about. I read the monthly statements like other people read prayers. Each figure was a small sentence in a language only I spoke. One evening Daniel knocked on the basement door. He rarely knocked. "Can we talk?" he asked. I set down my ledger and motioned to the chair. He sat but did not meet my eyes. "We're close to finalizing the Azure Cliff deal," he said. "There's an investor providing bridge financing. Anonymous trust out of Oregon. The rate is generous." I almost laughed at the word generous. "And you trust them?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "We've checked the paperwork. Everything is legitimate. This will change everything for us." For us. He still used the plural even when the subject was only himself. He looked around the basement as if seeing it for the first time. You should move upstairs after we close. There'll be space. I nodded slowly. Space, I said. That's nice. When he left, I opened the ledger again and wrote a new line. The day the bird flew into the cage by choice. Later that night, I stood by the basement window watching the lights of passing cars brush across the ceiling. Above me, laughter spilled from the living room. Amelia's voice was bright again, Daniel's softer, agreeable. They were talking about the view they would have when the new house was finished. I whispered to the darkness, "You already have the view. You just don't see who is watching." The darkness did not answer, but the hum of the heater deepened as if it understood. The following week, the first payment from the trust went through. Grace sent confirmation at dawn. Deposit executed. Control clause pending. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I went upstairs to make coffee. Amelia was in the kitchen wearing a robe and tapping on her phone. She looked up surprised. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep." She smiled faintly. "Nerves about the big deal?" "Something like that." She poured coffee into a mug that read "Boss Lady" in gold script. I watched the steam curl above the rim. "Once we move to Azure Cliff, you'll love it," she said. "There's a small guest suite. You can stay there whenever you want." Whenever I want. Words that mean rarely, if ever. "I'll think about it," I said. She nodded satisfied and went back to her phone. I finished my cup, washed it carefully, and placed it upside down on the rack. In the garden that afternoon, the wind carried a faint smell of salt and rain. The hens scratched near my feet, unbothered by the coming storm. I picked a sprig of rosemary and held it between my fingers. Its scent was sharp, clean, awake. "You don't need to shout to be heard," I told it. That evening I added one more line to the ledger. The day patience grew teeth. The first storm of the season rolled in at dawn. The air carried that thick metallic taste that comes before rain, and every window in the house rattled as if testing its hinges. I stood in the garden long enough to feel the first drops hit my face, then went back inside before Amelia could notice. She hated when I brought wet footprints into her polished world. In the basement, I made tea and opened the ledger. The paper curled slightly from humidity, but the ink held steady. I ran my finger over the last entry, "The day patience grew teeth." The page looked finished, but I could feel the next line waiting. By noon, the wind was howling against the house, loud enough to drown out voices upstairs. I sat by the window and watched water stream down the glass like handwriting I could almost read. Somewhere above, Amelia's heels tapped across the hardwood, sharp and restless. A door slammed, then another. Daniel's voice followed, low and strained. It was strange how easily you could tell the weather inside a marriage by listening from below. Later, when the rain softened, I went upstairs. Amelia was pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. "That can't be right," she said. "The investors' funds were supposed to clear this morning. You said Tuesday at the latest." I paused in the doorway. She turned startled. For a second, she forgot to hide her expression. It was the look of someone who just realized their reflection had changed. She lowered her voice. "We'll sort it out," she said to whoever was on the line, then forced a smile at me. "Just a minor delay." "Rain does that," I said. "It slows everything down." When she left the room, I noticed a document open on the counter. An email printout with the Eclipse Trust header at the top. The sight of it almost made me laugh. They had no idea how close they were to the truth, how much of their world already rested in my quiet hands. I poured myself a glass of water and went back downstairs. The rain had eased into a steady rhythm, like the sound of slow applause. Grace called that evening. "Funds held as instructed," she said. "They'll have to request release formally." "Let them wait," I replied. "They'll panic." "I'm counting on it." She chuckled softly. "You were always better at patience than I was. I had more practice." After the call, I wrote another entry in the ledger. The day the storm tested the roof and found it hollow. Days passed. The tension upstairs thickened like humidity before thunder. I could hear it in the way Daniel sighed over dinner, the way Amelia's laughter came a fraction too late. She began spending long hours on her laptop, whispering numbers to herself. Daniel snapped more often, his voice tight with frustration. One evening he came down to the basement again. He didn't sit this time. He stood near the door, rain dripping from his jacket. "The investors holding the funds," he said. "Some technical clause." "Amelia's furious." "I can imagine," I said. He hesitated. "You've been quiet lately." "Nothing new there." "Maybe talk to her," he said. "You calm her down." I smiled faintly. "Do I?" He sighed and rubbed his temples. "I don't know. Everything's falling apart. Just stay out of it, okay?" "Of course." When he left, I closed the door gently and turned to the mirror leaning against the wall. The reflection that looked back at me was calm, older, and no longer frightened. I had become invisible in their world, and invisibility, I realized, was not emptiness. It was camouflage. 2 weeks later, Grace sent another message. "Voting rights consolidated. 40% confirmed." I stared at the screen. The words looked simple enough, but they carried the weight of an earthquake. 40% meant no decision could move forward without me. No sale, no contract, no dream house on the cliff. That night I lit a single candle and placed it beside the ledger. I turned to a new page and wrote, "The day the floor shifted under their feet." The next morning Amelia knocked on the basement door. Her tone was sugary but cracked around the edges. "Sylvie, we're heading out to finalize some paperwork. The developer wants us there by noon." I nodded. "Big day." She smiled too quickly. "Yes, and please remember to stay available. They might need your signature for something minor." "Something minor," I repeated. After she left, I sat on the cot, holding the candle stub between my fingers. I remembered every word she had said to me over the years, every small cut she had made sound polite. "You're not on the deed. You can stay in the lower unit. We'll handle the grown-up parts." They thought silence was surrender. It wasn't. It was storage. Every insult was a coin dropped into a jar. And today the jar was full. At noon I changed into my best coat. Not elegant but dignified. I packed the ledger into my bag along with a small envelope Grace had mailed me the week before. Inside it was the document that tied everything together, my formal authorization as principal of Eclipse Trust. When I stepped outside, the storm clouds had cleared, leaving the air washed clean. The road glistened with puddles that reflected pieces of sky. I walked slowly, letting the wind push against my hair. At the bus stop I looked back once at the house. The curtains fluttered in the open window, white and soft like surrender flags. I almost pitied them, Daniel and Amelia, trapped in the story they had written for themselves. Almost. The bus arrived. I climbed aboard and took a seat by the window. As it pulled away, I caught my reflection in the glass, a small figure with steady eyes. The world outside moved in reverse, the house shrinking behind me until it was just another on the cliff. For the first time in years I wasn't heading home. I was heading toward the place where the story would turn. I rested my palm against my bag, feeling the edge of the envelope inside. The paper was cool beneath the fabric, alive with possibility. I smiled. The garden had taught me something after all. Every seed needs darkness before it breaks open. The rest would bloom soon enough. The developers' offices were the kind that make you whisper without being asked. Everything was glass and limestone and quiet money. I arrived early and let the receptionist point me to a chair that did not wish to be sat on. A large screen on the far wall played a business channel with the sound low. The ticker crawled along the bottom as if it knew secrets and could only hint at them. A segment rotated into view. The anchor smiled with perfect teeth and spoke over a chart that looked like a skyline. I leaned forward. The caption read Ocean View Developments. A second line slid underneath. Quiet fund increases stake across coastal portfolio. A logo appeared in the corner. Crescent within a circle. A small eclipse that did not brag about itself. I watched my own shadow drift across the polished floor. The anchor moved on. The room resumed its neutral temperature. When I looked down at my hands, they were folded so neatly that for a moment I did not recognize them. They looked like hands that had always known where to rest. Daniel and Amelia swept in with the damp glamour of people who had been running and wanted you to admire the running. She wore a cream suit that turned the hallway into a runway. He wore the same jacket as always but with his shoulders a little higher. He saw me and lifted his chin. "You are early," he said. I smiled. I liked to watch the ocean change color. Amelia kissed the air near my cheek. There was relief in the gesture, a private exhale wrapped in perfume. "We are going to make this happen," she said in a voice for the room. "We ironed out the delays. The investor has finally aligned." Aligned. As if money were planets that could be persuaded into the right orbit by someone's certainty. She squeezed Daniel's arm and the receptionist smiled the way receptionists are trained to smile when they sense a victory that is not theirs. We were shown into a conference room with a long table that knew how to host decisions. The developers team was already there. The project director, Mr. Kellen, stood to greet us with a calm that did not need announcement. His lawyer sat beside him with a folder that I recognized by texture before I saw the embossed logo. "Thank you for coming," Kellen said. "We have several items to finalize." He glanced at me with quiet respect and then at Daniel. "We will need all signatures today." Amelia angled her body toward him as if proximity could speed approval. "Of course," she said. "Everything is in order." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the trust directive on the land parcel. As previously noted, the principal consent is required for any transfer." He looked at me when he said principal. The word landed softly and then stayed where it fell. We sat. Folders open like careful mouths. Someone brought in water in glasses that made ordinary water look expensive. Papers slid back and forth. There was a rhythm to it, a choreography. I had learned the steps long ago. I performed them with an ease that did not advertise itself. Amelia handled her side of the conversation like a conductor. She spoke of schedules and milestones. She gestured at renderings on a screen where the estate appeared in morning light and evening light, and that special light that only exists in sales. Daniel backed her with numbers that sat straight in their chairs. He was always good with numbers. He had never learned that numbers can be loyal to whoever holds the pen. A break was called. People dispersed into small islands. I stood near the window and watched a gull balance on the lip of the building across the street. The bird lifted one foot, tucked it, and then decided on both again. Even balance requires rehearsal. Amelia came to stand beside me. Her smile had softened into something almost human. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know these meetings are not your favorite." "I like rooms that teach me something," I said. "And what does this room teach you?" she asked. "That gravity is not loud." She looked puzzled for a breath and then laughed as if I had told a joke with an ending she could not hear. "We are going to take care of you," she said. "Once we close, everything will change. You will have your own space." She paused. "Your own shelf," she added, with a playful tone that wanted to turn a wound into a charm. I looked at her reflection in the glass instead of at her face. The reflection made her look softer than she was. "It is kind of you to offer," I said. The break ended. We returned to our seats. Kellen resumed with the list. The lawyer handed me a form that required my consent to release the ground lease into the new structure. He explained every clause though he knew I already knew them. I listened with the patience of someone who had learned that dignity is often a quiet repetition of what you already understand. Daniel signed a page and slid it to Amelia. She signed and slid it back, the pen graceful in her fingers. She looked up in triumph and met my eyes. There was a sparkle there that did not belong to joy. It belonged to arrival. Kellen nodded to the lawyer, who produced a second stack. "And now the consent of the principal." The room tilted a degree or two. It was so small that only the people who had learned to see would have felt it. I placed my fingertips on the top page. The text was the same as it had been in my basement. Here the paper had a different weight, the weight of witnesses. I read the first sentence as if it were new. It said the same thing it had said at my desk under the humming pipes. It said that the ground did not move without me. "Before we proceed," Kellen said, "we should address one item." His tone was even, but even tones can also be doors. "There has been a formal instruction issued by Eclipse Trust regarding the disposition of any title once consent is given." Amelia sat a fraction taller. "Instruction from the investor," she said brightly. "Wonderful. We are fully aligned." Kellen looked at her and then at me. His eyes were polite and exact. "The instruction comes from the principal." I kept my face quiet. Silence is a shawl. You can wrap it tighter without anyone noticing. Daniel shifted in his chair. "What instruction?" Kellen gave a small nod to the lawyer. The lawyer slid a single page to the center of the table. Faced me. The print was black and calm. The heading bore a foundation name that sounded like morning. He tapped the corner lightly. At the time of consent, the parcel will be transferred into Havenlight Foundation with the principal stipulations as recorded. He paused and let the words sit with us. The developer recognizes this disposition. Our role is to effect the transfer according to the principal's direction. The room held itself very still. Somewhere a vent clicked. Outside, a gull drew a white mark in the air and then erased it. Amelia spoke first. "This is a joke." "No," the lawyer said gently. She turned to Daniel. "Say something." Daniel looked at me the way a man looks at the sea after it has crossed his line in the sand. "Mother, what are you doing?" I set my hands flat on the table and felt the cool come through the paper. "I am doing what I said I would do," I said. "I have come to sign what is mine to sign." "You cannot just give it away," Amelia said. Her voice climbed a step. "We built this. We earned this." I thought of my hands in the soil. I thought of the hens and their steady gossip. I thought of the ledger with its calm, sharp lines. I looked at Amelia's bright certainty and felt a tenderness I had not expected. "You built a picture," I said. "I am changing the frame." Kellen folded his hands. "To proceed, we need consent from the principal on both documents. The foundation has provided its acceptance. Our record will reflect today's signatures." The notary moved closer. The stamp made its small promise to the air. I took the pen. My name went down on the first line, then on the second. The sound of the nib against the paper was so soft that it felt like listening to my own breath. When I slid the pages back, the notary pressed the stamp. The ink flared and settled. "Thank you," Kellen said. His voice had a respect in it that did not need decoration. "We will execute immediately." Amelia stood so fast that her chair bit the floor. "You planned this," she said to me. "You waited and you planned and you let us do all the work." I stood more slowly. "Waiting is work," I said. "So is listening." Daniel pushed his chair back and faced the window. His shoulders were a straight line drawn with a ruler that had slipped. He spoke without turning. "We needed this," he said. "We needed a start. We needed a way out." I watched his reflection. He was still my son. He was also a man who had forgotten that love is not a ledger. I wanted to touch his arm and did not. I wanted to tell him that failure can be a teacher if you do not turn it into a costume. I said nothing. Sometimes the kindest sentence is the one you do not deliver to a person who cannot hear it. Kellen closed his folder. "There is one final administrative note," he said. "The principal has required that the lobby plaque at Havenlight include 2 honorary sponsors." He read the names carefully, as if reading a blessing. "Daniel Sparks. Amelia Hart Sparks." Amelia stared. "That is cruel." "No," I said. "That is memory." The meeting dissolved the way meetings do when the center has spoken and the edges have no more script. People shook hands. People avoided eyes. A small army of emails left the room without legs. I collected my bag. I thanked the receptionist on the way out. The business channel still ran with the sound low. The ticker kept its secrets. Outside, the wind smelled like rain again, but the sky was a pale, clean blue. I stood under it for a moment and let it talk to me. A gull came close, changed its mind, and went somewhere else. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. A message from Grace. 4 words. "All filings in motion." I smiled at the screen and did not reply. She knew my answer. The road home unwound in front of me. It looked different now because it was. The world does that when you tell it your true name. At the bus stop, a man in a suit asked if I knew which line went to the waterfront. I told him. He thanked me and hurried away. I watched him go and thought of Daniel walking fast through years, always chasing a line on a horizon that moved when he moved. I thought of Amelia polishing her reflection until she could not see through it. I thought of my garden waiting for me with the evening light collecting in the lavender. On the ride back, I sat near the window and let the city pass like a long, slow parade. Storefronts. A girl with a red scarf. A dog asleep against a shoe. People making small bargains with their day. I rested my hand on my bag where the documents slept. The paper did not feel heavy now. It felt like something that had found its shape. When I reached our street, the air tasted like salt. I walked past the gate, paused and looked at the house. From the sidewalk, it still managed to look generous. That was its last trick. I stood there long enough to name the lie and let it go. Then I opened the gate and went through to the garden. The hens greeted me with the same old news. The rosemary brushed my sleeve. The light was perfect. I knelt in the soil and pressed my fingers into the cool dark. The earth accepted them the way it accepts rain, the way it accepts seeds, the way it accepts what falls and what grows. Tomorrow would be louder than today. Tomorrow the first whispers would start. Tomorrow the tide would move further in. I closed my eyes and listened to the ocean find its breath. I smiled. The deal was moving. The story was turning. And for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel like it was shrinking. Felt like it was learning my size. That night the wind came in from the west, carrying salt and the sound of something beginning to end. I slept lightly, waking every few hours to the hush of the waves and the creak of the floorboards above me. Somewhere in the house Amelia cried quietly, a sound almost delicate, as if she were afraid of breaking her own sadness. By morning she was gone. No note, no explanation, only her perfume still clinging to the hall. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. He looked smaller, like someone who had stepped out of his own photograph. "I didn't know," he said. "I believe you." She said the foundation thing was reversible, that the investors would fix it. "The investors will fix nothing. They already have what they need." He stared into his coffee. "You always hated her." "No," I said softly. "I hated what she turned you into." He flinched, then pushed his chair back. The sound scraped the silence clean. "You think this makes you right? You humiliated us." I shook my head. "I simply reminded you whose ground you were standing on." He left the mug still full, still shaking slightly from his hands. When the door slammed, the house trembled but did not fall. That week the newspapers began to speak in numbers again. A short column on page 6 announced the Haven Light Foundation's acquisition of the Azure Cliff parcel. Another column, smaller, mentioned an internal dispute among Ocean View's buyers. No names, no pictures, only a single sentence that made me smile. Source indicates the primary landholder acted through a private trust known for strategic discretion. Strategic discretion. Such graceful words for what was, at its heart, a lesson. Grace called the next evening. "It's done," she said. "Havenlight has filed all transfers. The trust dissolves quietly next month." "Good," I said. "You could keep it active. There are other ventures." "No," I said. "Let the garden rest." She laughed softly. "You always end where you begin. That's the only way the circle holds." We spoke a few minutes more about small things, the weather, the price of tea, the new lavender crop near her house, then said goodbye without ceremony. She had been my accomplice, yes, but also my witness. We both knew that after this call there would be nothing left to conspire about. Days folded into one another. The tension in the house shifted from sharp to hollow. Daniel stopped coming home some nights. When he did, he moved like a man walking through a museum of his own mistakes. I cooked enough for two and left the second plate untouched. The garden grew wild with spring. The hens nested in corners I hadn't expected. Life, once given permission, never asked before returning. One afternoon a letter arrived. The envelope bore the Havenlight seal in pale gold. Inside was an invitation. "We cordially invite Mrs. Sylvie Sparks, honorary founder, to the dedication of Havenlight Home for Women." I read it twice, folded it back, and set it on the table beside my teacup. For a long time I watched the steam rise and vanish. I thought about all the women who would walk through that building without knowing my name, who would sleep in safety under a roof built from my silence. That was enough. That night Daniel came to the basement doorway. He looked exhausted, older than his years. "I saw the article," he said. "They're calling you a philanthropist." I smiled faintly. Journalists love their adjectives. He hesitated. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I said. "You just stop repeating it." He nodded slowly. "Amelia's gone. She took the car, the savings. I guess it's fair." "Fairness," I said, "is rarely symmetrical." He stepped closer. "Do you hate me?" "No. I'm your mother." That's a different kind of sentence. For a long time we stood in the quiet. Then he whispered, "I was wrong." I touched his sleeve. "You were young. I'm still young. Then learn faster." He almost smiled. It was small but real. When he left, I knew the door would not slam again. A week later I took the bus to the dedication. The building stood on a hill overlooking the same ocean that had watched everything else unfold. It was simple white, full of windows. Children's laughter carried from the courtyard. The plaque at the entrance gleamed in the sunlight. Haven Light Foundation. Honorary sponsors: Daniel Sparks, Amelia Hart Sparks. The irony did not sting. It felt like symmetry finally drawn with a steady hand. Inside, the director showed me around. There were clean beds, fresh paint, a kitchen that smelled of bread. A young woman with a baby thanked me without knowing why. I told her to take care of herself. She said she would try. Before leaving, I walked through the garden behind the building. Rows of rosemary and lavender already lined the path. The wind carried the same sharp, clean scent I had always loved. I knelt, pressed my palm against the soil and whispered, "Grow." The earth accepted the word. When I returned home that evening, the sky was violet with the last light. The house was quiet. In the distance, I heard Daniel closing the gate. The hens rustled in their coop. I sat on the porch and opened my ledger one last time. The final page waited, blank but patient. I wrote slowly. The day the house stopped shrinking. Then beneath it, the day silence found its voice. I closed the book, set it beside me, and listened as the ocean folded itself into the dark. Somewhere inside, the old clock struck once and then once more, a heartbeat apart. I smiled and whispered into the wind, "The deal is done." The sky that morning looked freshly washed, as if the world had tried to erase the night before. I woke before dawn, the way I always did when something important was waiting. The ocean outside breathed slowly, steady and deep, the same way my husband used to breathe beside me before life decided we had both slept long enough. I boiled water on the hot plate and poured it over the tea leaves. The steam rose and disappeared, leaving only the faint scent of jasmine. I sipped once slowly, then set the cup down beside the folder on my desk. The folder was thin, deceptively light, but I could feel its gravity. Inside were the signatures that could change the direction of an entire family. I opened my notebook and read the last line I had written the previous night. The day silence found its voice. The ink had dried perfectly. I smiled at the page, then closed it for good. Some stories end with noise. Mine would end with clarity. When I left the house, the wind pushed gently at my back, like a hand that knew where I needed to go. The bus came late. I did not mind. The ride along the coast felt like a rehearsal for something final. I watched the waves glint silver, watched fishermen pull in their morning nets, watched the city unfold into glass and steel. By the time I reached the developer's building, I had rehearsed every possible outcome. I would walk in quietly, sit in the same chair, and let the paper speak. I did not need to raise my voice. The truth would do that for me. Inside, the lobby hummed with polite urgency. Receptionists smiled the way professionals smile, when they have been trained to show warmth without using it. The elevator doors opened with a soft sigh. My reflection followed me inside, calm, older, not broken. When I reached the conference floor, I could already hear their voices through the half-open door. Amelia's tone was sharp and bright, the sound of someone holding a mirror too close to the sun. Daniel's voice was lower, steady but tired. They were arguing about a missing clause, something about timelines and funding. Their words bounced off the walls like trapped birds. I knocked once. They turned. For a second, both their faces softened, relief, surprise, calculation. Then the masks returned. "You came," Daniel said. "I was invited," I answered. Amelia gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. We just need your signature. Everything is ready now." I walked to the table, my steps slow but certain. The folder waited at my place, open to the signature page. The same black line. The same request. "Before I sign," I said, "I'd like to understand one thing." Amelia tilted her head. "Of course. Why does the document say final consent, if this is only a transfer?" She hesitated. "That's just the legal phrasing. Nothing changes for you." Daniel leaned forward. "It just finalizes the ownership so we can secure financing. That's all." I nodded, pretending to believe them, and reached for the pen. My hand did not shake. I drew a small breath, then placed my signature where they expected it. The ink bled slightly into the page. I handed the pen back. "There," I said softly. "All done." Amelia exhaled in triumph. "Finally." She turned to Daniel. I told you she'd cooperate once she saw it was safe. Daniel smiled in relief. Thank you, Mom. This means everything to us. I stood and adjusted the strap of my bag. I know. As I reached the door, it opened before I could touch it. Mr. Kellen stood there, composed as always, followed by his lawyer. Behind them came a notary and a young assistant carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Sparks, Kellen said, inclining his head. Thank you for coming. We can begin the transfer now. Amelia frowned. The transfer? We just signed. Yes, Kellen said. We are proceeding according to the directive issued by the principal through Eclipse Trust. Daniel blinked. The what? The lawyer opened the briefcase and removed a thin stack of papers. He laid them on the table and turned the first page toward Daniel and Amelia. Under the trust's instructions, ownership of the Azure Cliff parcel and all related assets is hereby conveyed to Haven Light Foundation. For a heartbeat, the room forgot how to breathe. Amelia's eyes darted across the page, desperate to find a loophole that wasn't there. Daniel's lips parted but no sound came out. The silence that followed was thick enough to see. You can't be serious, Amelia whispered. This isn't legal. The lawyer looked at her gently. It's entirely legal, Mrs. Sparks. The trust owns the property. Mrs. Sparks, as the principal, authorized this transfer. Daniel turned to me. His voice cracked. You did this. I met his eyes. Yes. Why? Because you taught me to sign things I don't understand. I thought it was time you learned how that feels. Amelia slammed her palm on the table. You've destroyed us. I shook my head. No. I freed you. You no longer have anything left to pretend about. Kellen cleared his throat. The foundation has agreed to maintain honorary recognition for both of you. Your names will appear on the donor plaque. Amelia laughed, sharp and brittle. A plaque? You think that matters? I looked at her and smiled sadly. It's more than you offered me. Daniel sank into his chair, face pale, eyes distant. All those months you planned this? Planned. I said. No. I prepared. Preparation is just planning done by people who have learned patience. He rubbed his face, fingers trembling. What happens to us now? You start over, I said. Without lies. The notary stamped the last document. The sound echoed like a small gavel. Kellen gathered the pages and placed them in his folder. All filings are complete. Congratulations, Mrs. Sparks. Thank you, I said quietly. He nodded to me with respect, then turned to Daniel and Amelia. Good day. When they left, the room felt larger, emptier. Amelia stood by the window, staring out at the city. You think this makes you noble? She asked, her voice shaking. You think the world will praise you? I don't care what the world thinks, I said. I only care that the house stopped shrinking. She turned, eyes wet but furious. You'll be alone. No one will forgive you. Forgiveness is overrated, I said. Peace is quieter. She grabbed her purse and stormed out. The door hit the wall and bounced back, left ajar. Daniel remained seated, silent, a man made of disbelief. I don't hate you, I said. He looked up slowly. You should. I can't. You're still the child I once carried across a flooded street because you were afraid of the water. You thought it would swallow you whole. But it never wanted to. Just wanted you to stop fighting it. He swallowed hard. You could have talked to me. I did, I said. You stopped hearing me years ago. He stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, he said without turning, I don't know if I'll ever understand you. That's fine, I said. You don't have to. Just remember that silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right echo. When he left, I finally sat down. The chair was still warm from his body. I stared at the window. Outside, clouds drifted over the ocean, soft and endless. A slant of sunlight broke through, painting the water gold. I let it fill the room, fill me. Later that evening, I returned to the house. It was quieter than I had ever known it. The air smelled faintly of sea salt and dust. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the corners, the memories. The echo of laughter still lived here, faint but alive. In the living room, I found an envelope on the table. Daniel's handwriting. I'll be gone for a while. Maybe one day we'll talk again. Take care of yourself, Mom. I folded the letter and set it beside the vase of lilies Amelia had left behind. Their petals had begun to brown at the edges. Beauty never lasts, but meaning does. Outside, the garden waited. The lavender bent gently in the evening breeze, and the hens murmured in their coop. I knelt and pressed my palm to the soil. It was cool and forgiving. A faint sound of thunder rolled across the sea, far away, harmless now. The storm had already passed. I sat there until the light faded, watching the horizon blur into blue and gray. For the first time I felt the true size of silence, not as emptiness, but as space wide enough to live in. Tomorrow I would visit the foundation. Tomorrow they would begin planting the first herbs in the courtyard garden, using soil from this very house. I smiled at the thought. Everything circles back if you give it time. When the last of the light vanished, I whispered into the air. You wanted my signature. Now you have my story. The wind moved through the rosemary and carried the scent toward the sea. I let it go. And for the first time in years I didn't feel small at all. The morning after the transfer, the town woke with new weather. Not rain. Not wind. A pressure you can only feel in the way people look up from their coffee and decide they have something to say. I walked to the market at 8 and noticed how the cashier, who never remembered my name, said it softly like a secret she was relieved to share. Good morning, Mrs. Sylvie, she said. Lovely day. It was. Sunlight ran along the roofs like a ribbon being pulled. I bought eggs, wildflower honey, and a paper I did not open until I was home. The front page held the war and the economy. The story I cared about lived inside. Printed without drama, 2 paragraphs long. Haven Light Foundation finalizes acquisition of Azure Cliff parcel. Sources confirm the transaction proceeded under the authorization of the principal landholder, acting through a private trust. Renovations begin this summer. The facility will serve women seeking safe transitional housing. There were no names. There did not need to be. People know how to add names on their own. I folded the paper and set it beside the kettle. The garden pulled me outside. The morning smelled of mint and damp wood. The hens trailed me like a procession, hopeful and unembarrassed. I broke off a sprig of rosemary and held it beneath my nose. It smelled like clean decisions. By noon the phone began to ring. The first calls were polite. The director from Havenlight confirmed the installation schedule for the plaque and asked whether I preferred serif or sans serif for the lettering. I told her to choose whatever would be easiest to read for tired eyes. She laughed and said tired eyes are the kind that read with the most care. The next calls were not so polite. A reporter wanted a quote in your own words, Mrs. Sparks. I said my words had already been used for the week. A neighbor asked whether the plaque would really say those names. I said yes. She made a noise that meant both good and finally. Around 3 a message arrived from Grace. Silence on our end. The lattice has dissolved. I stared at that sentence a long time. The work that had carried me for years had gone transparent, then gone still, and now was simply gone. Relief can feel like a small grief. I let it pass through me and out the other side. Toward evening a different noise began. Not my phone. Other people's phones. The neighbor's teenager plays the news too loudly. The bar on the corner keeps the television above the bottles. The bus driver lets the radio chatter between stops. I heard my house mentioned in places where it had never been invited. It was not my name, not yet. It was the shape of me, which is the same as a name if you trace it long enough. A friend from the library texted a link to a clip that was already making its way across town. A voice I knew too well, airy with wine and victory. The moment we close I am sending her to a facility. 2 birds, 1 stone. The person on the other end laughed. The clink of glass. The sound of a chair sliding back on hardwood that might have been my floor. I did not remember how that sentence had been captured. I remembered the evening. People on the patio. Laughter that made the rosemary twitch. I had stood in the kitchen doorway with a tray and listened to the future trying to speak in the rude voice of the present. Maybe the microphone was a phone left face down. Maybe it was a memory finally deciding not to be private any longer. In the end, the delivery system mattered less than the truth. The truth was the whole clip. The truth walked without limping. It reached the church first. Things like that always do. By morning, ladies who had once praised Amelia's taste now stood in a circle that was not a circle and said words that cut with clean edges. By afternoon the law firm that sent her holiday cards stopped liking her posts. By evening the friends who loved expensive dinners stopped answering her messages, and then stopped not answering them and said what they had saved for years. Daniel did not come home that night. The house felt balanced for once, not like a scale trying to hold two different metals. I made soup and ate it by the window with the ocean making a low sound like someone sleeping in another room. The next day I walked past the coffee shop and saw two men who used to laugh too loudly when Daniel told a story about returns and spreads. They glanced at me and then away. Shame is a soft animal when it is yours and a hungry one when it is someone else's. I nodded anyway. They stared at their lids and found nothing printed there. At the grocer, Mrs. Patel reached under the counter and handed me a paper bag of oranges. On the house, she said. For the garden. For you. I have enough, I said. Then you will have more, she said in a tone that ended the conversation as kindly as it had begun. On the third day Amelia lost her job. No one said fired. They said transition and restructure and brand alignment. Every euphemism carried a bruise. She moved through town with sunglasses on and her phone pressed to her ear. She never looked down. Men who had once stared at her now stared at the sidewalk because it is easier to remember a stone than a person. Daniel showed up in the evening, thin with a storm he could not outrun. He stood in the kitchen and put his hands on the counter as if it knew where he had misplaced his future. They will not meet with me, he said. No one returns calls. People do not like to be near a tide when it comes in, I said. They do not want to guess whether they can swim. He looked tired in a way that childhood cannot fix. This is punishment, he said. This is consequence, I said. Punishment is what people do to you. Consequence is what arrives when you keep ordering the same thing. He flinched and then nodded. He set his phone down as if it were heavy and stepped back from it as if it might break. What am I supposed to do? Stop the part of yourself that believes you deserve more love than you give, I said. After that, call an old friend and ask a small favor. After that, take a job you think is beneath you and do it well. The world likes humility when it is real. He rubbed his eyes. Do you ever regret it? The way you did it. Every day I waited, I said. And not at all. He laughed once without finding the smile that laughter should come with. He picked up his phone and left the kitchen. The door did not slam. Progress looks like that when it first arrives. It has manners. News began to settle into habit. The clip lived for a cycle and then became a cautionary tale people told with small edits that made them feel wise. The Foundation's press office sent a quiet announcement about the renovation schedule and volunteer training. A pastor whose voice could persuade rain to take a break wrote an editorial about care. The city council voted to expedite permits. The workers at the site put up a fence that did not apologize for being a fence. I visited the hill and found the crew planting the first stakes for the herb beds. The foreman asked what to plant by the southern wall. I said rosemary on the corners, lavender in a line, mint only where there is stone to contain it. He smiled and wrote it down like a spell. On my way back, an older woman stopped me at the bus stop. I had seen her before near the pier, feeding gulls in a coat that used to be blue. She held my wrist with a hand that shook. I heard, she said, and her eyes filled as if the ocean had finally found a way inside them. Thank you. For what? I asked gently. For making a door where there was only wall, she said. For someone like me. She released my wrist and wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve the way people do when they do not trust paper to be kind. I wanted to hug her and did not because I did not want to, but because there are moments that should be kept whole and not turned into anything else. The bus came. I sat by the window and watched her become smaller, and then simply part of the street again. We are all part of the street. We only forget when our shoes are new. At home I found a letter slipped under the door. No envelope. Daniel's handwriting. I am selling the boat. I do not know why I bought it. I never wanted the ocean. I only wanted other people to see me near it. I put the note with the others in the kitchen drawer where we keep corks and rubber bands and bandages that pretend they will be needed less often than they are. I wanted to write back. Instead I went into the garden and sat on the low wall and closed my eyes. The sound of the sea has layers when you stop letting it be only one thing. There is the push. There is the pull. There is the far voice that says I was here before you and will be here after you. And if you listen you can borrow my rhythm for a while. I listened until my breath adopted that rhythm, And then I stood up and watered the mint with the care you give to things that will overgrow you if you are not careful. The next morning I walked to the hill again. A small banner had been hung on the temporary fence. Haven Light. In letters that could be read by eyes that had been crying. A volunteer hammered a sign into the grass that listed a day and a time for training. She missed twice and made a face that was more child than adult. I took the hammer from her and set the sign in 3 true blows. She laughed and said I made it look easy. I told her everything is easy when you have been practicing for longer than anyone suspects. On my way home I stopped at the little shop that sells seed packets and advice you do not need until later. The owner, who always wore shirts the color of cheerful vegetables, pointed me to a display of perennials and then, without comment, rang up my order and slipped 2 extra packets into the bag. For your new place, he said. I opened my mouth to correct him and did not. Yes, my new place. The hill and the garden behind the clean white rooms. The plaque that would tell a story even to people who did not want stories and only wanted to get through the day. That night late the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I opened the door. The air brings the shape of certain people ahead of them like a herald. Amelia stood on the porch. No suit. No sunglasses. A sweater that agreed with the weather. She held herself carefully, like an apology she had not practiced yet. May I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She entered with that particular slowness of people who have forgotten how to be guests. The kitchen felt too clean for the conversation waiting there. She sat at the table. I stood because some balances should not be altered by furniture. I lost everything, she said, the words flat, a list without commas. The job. The friends. The apartment we were going to rent near the water. The respect. I did not know respect could leave. It leaves quickly, I said. It comes back slowly if at all. She looked up at me with eyes that had been rinsed by a hard week. I was cruel, she said. I made a home smaller and called it Progress. I am sorry. There it was. Not elegant. Not strategic. The simple sentence people carry for years and then finally set down because their hands are tired. I accept your apology, I said. It is yours. Keep it. Carry it. Use it when you build the next rooms. She let out a breath that had been sitting at the top of her chest. Do you hate me? She asked. No, I said. But I am not your audience anymore. She nodded once as if that line had been waiting for her, and finally had arrived with her name on it. She stood. At the door she paused. They will all remember this as your revenge, she said. They will be wrong, I said. It is my correction. When she was gone I stood in the doorway a while and let the wind draw a line under the evening. In the distance the ocean turned over in its sleep and adjusted the silver on its surface. I went to the basement and opened the ledger. There was 1 clean page left. I dated it. Then I wrote only 2 words. Fallout. Stillness. I closed the book and set it on the shelf. Tomorrow I would begin another notebook with a different title. Not a ledger. Not a plan. A simple garden journal. Planting notes. Rainfall. First bloom. Last harvest. The kind of record that admits it is not trying to control anything. Only to notice. I turned off the light and let the dark be what it is when you stop making it into a lesson. Above me the house did not creak. It rested. It had learned how. The morning of the dedication began with low fog crawling along the coast like a thought that hadn't yet decided whether it should stay or leave. I woke early, earlier than usual, and for a moment I lay in bed listening to the stillness. Even the hens were quiet, as if the whole world had agreed to hold its breath until the sun made up its mind. I dressed simply, gray dress, wool coat, the small silver brooch Daniel had given me when he was 12. The mirror showed an ordinary woman, but the air around her carried a weight that didn't belong to age. When I stepped outside, dew clung to the lavender and turned every stem into glass. The path to the gate was soft from last night's drizzle. I locked the door and let the key rest in my pocket like a keepsake I hadn't yet decided to return. The bus was almost empty. I took my usual seat by the window, the one that let me watch the sea. Waves rolled in lazy spirals, brushing the shore with a rhythm older than any of our plans. I thought of how everything ends up learning that rhythm eventually, even stubbornness, even pride. The Haven Light building rose out of the fog like something that had always been there. White walls, wide windows, and a courtyard framed by herbs. The scent reached me before I even saw the entrance. rosemary, mint, lavender, all whispering the same patient song. Volunteers moved briskly, arranging chairs, tying ribbons, placing name cards that the wind kept rearranging. A few journalists stood near the fence, murmuring about light and composition. The director of the foundation, a tall woman with tired eyes and kind hands, spotted me and hurried over. "Mrs. Sparks," she said warmly, "I'm so glad you came." I smiled. It seemed rude not to attend my own correction. She laughed softly. "Then come, we'll begin soon." We walked through the courtyard together. Every bed had been freshly planted, the soil still dark with morning water. She stopped near the central fountain where the plaque waited under a white cloth. The sight of it made my heart tilt. A small crowd had gathered by the time the ceremony started. City officials, donors, staff, and a few faces from the town who had watched the story unfold from the safety of distance. There were polite smiles, camera flashes, the murmur of rehearsed kindness. The director stepped forward and spoke first, her voice steady, practiced, sincere. She talked about compassion, about community, about how one act of quiet generosity could ripple into something larger. People nodded. Some pretended they had understood silence their whole lives. Then she turned toward me. "Today we honor the woman whose vision made this possible," she said. "Mrs. Sylvie Sparks." The sound of my name in the microphone startled me more than I expected. Applause rose, soft at first, then growing like rain beginning to believe in itself. I stepped forward, not to speak but simply to be seen. I did not wave. I only nodded. The director lifted the cloth. Beneath it, the plaque gleamed in the light. Havenlight Foundation in honor of Sylvie Sparks, with gratitude to Daniel Sparks and Amelia Hart Sparks. For a long moment no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. I reached out and touched the edge of the plaque with my fingertips. It was cold, smooth, real. A small sound came from behind me, the click of a camera shutter. Then another. The journalists had found their angle. But I wasn't thinking of them. I was thinking of Daniel. He was there. I hadn't seen him arrive, but now he stood at the back of the crowd, hands in his pockets, face pale but calm. When our eyes met, time folded into something simple again. After the ceremony, he waited by the garden gate. I walked to him slowly, careful not to rush the moment. "You came," I said. "I wasn't sure I should." "You should," I said. "This place belongs to both of us." He nodded. "I read about the program. It's good work." "It's work that lasts," I said. "That's all I ever wanted for you too." He looked down at his shoes. "I thought I wanted power. Turns out I only wanted permission." "To what?" "To start over." I studied his face. The arrogance was gone. What remained was something quieter, almost humble. "Then start," I said. "The ocean is full of beginnings." He smiled faintly. "I sold the boat." "I know. Maybe one day I'll buy another. Smaller. Honest." "That's a good word," I said. "Honest." We stood in silence for a while, watching the volunteers carry chairs back inside. The garden shimmered with early light. The mint leaves trembled. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Not for forgiveness. Just for a visit. Sometimes." I nodded. "The door is unlocked now. You may come in when you remember why you're knocking." He breathed out. A sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "I'll try to earn it." "I know," I said. "You've already begun." He pressed my hand briefly, then turned and walked down the path toward the bus stop. His shoulders were still broad but no longer heavy. I watched until he disappeared behind the curve of the road. The director approached, smiling. "He looks proud of you." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe he's learning that pride and love are not the same thing." We stood together for a moment, both looking at the plaque. She touched the engraved letters lightly. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret is just grief that hasn't learned its manners," I said. "It visits, but I don't let it stay." She nodded, understanding more than she could say. "We could use your help with the workshops. Would you consider joining?" I looked at the women arriving through the gate, some shy, some smiling, some carrying bags that looked heavier than they were. I felt something shift inside me, not guilt, not pride, just a kind of rightness. "Yes," I said. "I'll come by next week. I can teach them about gardens." "Gardens?" she asked. I smiled. "It's the same lesson as survival. You plant what you can. You prune what hurts. You wait, and you forgive yourself when something doesn't bloom. She took my hand and squeezed it. That's exactly what we need here. The fog had lifted entirely by the time I left. The sky stretched open, clear and bright. As I walked toward the bus stop, a group of girls from the shelter were kneeling in the soil, pressing the first lavender shoots into the ground. They were laughing, their hands covered in earth. One of them looked up and waved. "Miss Sylvie, come see." I walked over and knelt beside her. "What are you planting?" "Lavender," she said proudly. "You said it keeps away the dark." I smiled. "Then plant as much as you can." She laughed and returned to her work. I stayed there, helping them set the roots, pressing soil around each stem until my hands were black with it. The smell of earth and salt and lavender filled the air. When the sun reached its highest point, I looked up. The hill, the building, the sea beyond. All of it shimmered together like one continuous breath. I thought of the ledger I had closed, the silence I had kept, the voice I had finally used. It all led here. To this quiet bloom. I brushed the dirt from my hands, stood, and whispered to no one in particular. "The consequence is peace." The wind lifted the words and carried them out to sea. The last week of spring arrived like a letter with no return address. The mornings were cool and clean, the afternoons warm enough to loosen every knot in the air, and the evenings full of cricket strings that stitched one day to the next. I woke before dawn each day without trying. The hens made their soft conversation in the coop, and the garden waited the way faithful things wait when they know you will come. I began walking the long way to the hill, past the bakery that opened early for fishermen, past the boarded shop that would reopen as something new when the owner remembered his courage, past the bench near the bus stop where an old man read the sports page like a devotion. On those walks I learned the names of the street trees, not from plaques but from the shapes of their leaves and the way they held light. A woman who notices leaves is a woman who has forgiven time for moving like water. The Haven-like courtyard had settled into its true voice. I could hear it before I saw it. Laughter not loud but easy. The scrape of trowels. The hush of hoses. A door closing gently, not because anyone demanded gentleness, but because that is how doors behave when the people passing through them have been granted permission to arrive. I helped in small ways. I taught how to loosen a root ball with patience instead of pulling. I showed where mint should be trapped with stone so it would not mistake generosity for invitation. I listened to stories that came out in slanted lines, not from shame, but from the way pain lets itself be told when the air is soft. They did not always know who I was. I did not tell them. It was enough to point to a patch of soil and say, "Here, try this, watch what survives." One morning I found a paper kite tangled in the rosemary hedge. The frame was bent but not broken. A child had drawn a clumsy star on its belly. I fixed the split with a strip of tape, then lifted the string and ran, not far, just enough for the wind to remember its job. The kite rose and steadied. A girl with careful eyes clapped her hands and took the string from me. Everything that matters in this world moves that way. You hand it to someone else when the wind has agreed to help. At home I kept the house quiet. The basement was no longer a temporary. It was a root. I changed the bulb to a softer glow and placed a small lamp on the desk that turned the page golden at the edges. I moved the ledger to the top shelf and brought down a clean notebook with a green cover. On the first page I wrote 3 lines. Rain last night. Mint in the corner bed spreading too fast. Dreamed of a gate with the ocean behind it. Daniel visited on a Thursday afternoon. He came without announcement, which used to anger me and now felt like proof we were learning a new language. He stood at the back door and waited until he saw me see him. "May I come in?" he asked. "Come in," I said. "Take your shoes off. The floor thanks you." He smiled at that. He had brought groceries. Oranges, oatmeal, a loaf of bread from the early bakery. He placed them on the counter as if placing a small promise. He moved differently in the room, less like a man trying to own the space, more like a man borrowing it carefully. "I got a job," he said. "What kind?" "Operations at a shipping yard. Night shift to start. Paperwork, planning routes, sometimes loading if they are short." "You will sleep badly at first," I said. "Then your body will make a contract with the moon." He laughed softly. "It is not glamorous. Glamour is only useful to mirrors," I said. "Work is useful to people." He reached into his jacket and set something small on the table. A photograph. The three of us in a kitchen that no longer exists. I was younger. He was 11. Amelia had her hair back in a scarf because she had been painting a wall the color of a ripe pear. The wall in the photo looked like sunlight even at night. The boy in the photo held a wooden sailboat and believed that a basin could stand in for an ocean. He was not wrong. "Keep it," he said. "Or throw it away. I only wanted you to know that I kept something real." "I will keep it," I said. "It is a window and a warning." He nodded. "I am trying to be both useful and kind," he said. "Start with useful," I said. "Kindness believes usefulness when it sees it." He poured us tea and did not ask questions that belonged to yesterday. We talked about the port, about how cranes move like giant patient birds, about how the tide has its own arithmetic that men pretend to have invented. When he left, he set his hand briefly on the doorframe as if saying thank you to a tree. That night I dreamed the same dream again. The gate, the ocean behind it, the sign that said entry by invitation only. In the dream I stood with the latch in my palm and did not open it. I woke before dawn and listened to the quiet enough to hear the smallest sounds within it. A hinge. A kettle. A page turning in a room with no one in it. The memory of a voice that once filled the house and then left a shape for me to walk around. On Saturday Amelia wrote. Not an email. A letter with real ink that had traveled in a bag with other letters, and had sat overnight in a building that smelled of paper, and hopes that do not expire. The envelope held my name in careful script. Inside, several lines without ornament. Sylvie, I have moved to a short-term place across town. I have a job in a store that sells shoes to people who stand all day. My feet ache in a way that is educational. I am attending meetings where you say your name and what you are trying not to do anymore. Some evenings I walk by the water and pretend I am not thinking of anything. I am thinking of everything. I would like to visit. Few will let me. I set the letter down and waited to feel what I was supposed to feel. Anger did not come. Victory did not come. A tide moved through me that had no name. I waited until it passed and then I wrote back on a plain card. 2 weeks from today. 4 in the afternoon. The garden. Use the side gate. S. When the day came, the sky was clear with a line of clouds kept respectfully at the horizon. I watered the rosemary and the lavender and swept the flagstones not because I wanted the place to shine, but because rooms listen better when the floor is honest. At 4 the side gate clicked. Amelia stepped in not as a conqueror, not as a defendant. As a person who had discovered gravity late and now respected it. She wore a blue dress and a cardigan with a missing button. She carried her hands like passengers who had bought a ticket and did not know the destination yet. We stood a few steps apart. The ocean spoke its low syllables beyond the fence. This is a good garden, she said. It is honest, I said. It gives back what you give and it repeats your neglect. She smiled without trying to sell me the smile. I have been repeating my neglect for years. You are learning a new sentence, I said. I am trying. We walked among the beds. She bent to smell the rosemary and surprised herself by crying. Not a performance. Not a plea. The simple overflow of a person who has discovered that sorrow and relief sometimes share the same pocket. I gave her a cloth handkerchief because paper cannot hold that much salt. She held it to her face and breathed the cotton until her breath remembered itself. Do you need money? I asked. No, she said. The job pays enough if I do not pretend I need admiration. She sat on the low wall and looked at the gate. I said terrible things. I made a plan for you that did not include you. You made a plan that did not include anyone who needed anything. I said. Those plans are fragile. They are made of glass. They look like futures. They break like dishes. She nodded. I do not know what to ask for. Then ask for nothing and accept what is offered, I said. That is how gardens begin. She wiped her eyes and laughed once. Do you still hate me? She asked, not as a test, but as a person who wanted a clean page. I do not hate you, I said. But the house you live in will never be mine again. I understand, she said, and I believed her. She stayed an hour. She told me about the store and how women with tired ankles would sit and confess things to her while trying on shoes. She said she had learned to listen without offering correction. She said the listening was a kind of work she should have learned first. When she stood to leave, she looked at the gate and then at me. May I come again if I earn it? She asked. Perhaps, I said. The sign says entry by invitation only. Learn what invites. Learn what does not. She nodded. She left by the side gate and closed it with a patient click. I stood there a long time, listening to the ocean show me how endings and beginnings share the same wave. That evening I wrote in the green notebook. I came to the garden. She watered the rosemary with her eyes. Salt is also a way to bless. I slept well, better than I had in years. The dream came again, but this time the gate was already open and the ocean stayed exactly where it was supposed to be, which is everywhere and also not in the yard. The days after her visit arrived in a steady line. I did my chores with more attention than usual, not because chores deserve worship, but because attention is how you tell a day that it was chosen. I aired the blankets, oiled the cutting board, sorted the drawer where old keys live with rubber bands and instructions for appliances that have already forgiven us for forgetting them. On Tuesday I carried a wooden board to the front fence. The board had been waiting in the shed, sanded smooth, unpainted. I stenciled the letters slowly in a brown that would grow gentle under sun. Entry by invitation only. I hung it on 2 small hooks so the wind could move through it. I stepped back and looked. The sign did not shout. It did not threaten. It gave a simple sentence to anyone who needed one. Around noon, a knock at the front door. Not the bell. Knuckles. The sound of someone who remembers houses belong to people before they belong to visitors. I opened the door and found 2 faces I recognized from a life I do not live anymore. A couple who had admired Amelia's taste when it made them feel as if taste could be shared by praise. Their expressions were careful, the way people look when they are about to apologize for the weather. We heard she might be here, the woman said. We wanted to bring her a casserole. She held out a dish covered in foil. It smelled like someone had tried to bake kindness and overcooked it. She is not here, I said gently. But you can leave the kindness. I know where to deliver it. The man looked past me, his eyes learning how to keep their balance in a room that did not invite them. He glanced at the sign, then back at me, and nodded in a way that meant he had not known such sentences could be public. They left the dish and their names and their relief. I closed the door and set the casserole on the counter. I wrote A on a small card and placed it under the edge of the foil. Later that day I took it across town and left it by her door with a note that said warm it slowly. Eat it with a spoon. Call no one while you are eating. On Thursday rain returned with a drummer's patience. I repaired a section of the coop roof and returned the hammer to the drawer with the odd screws that all promised to fit something one day. When I came back inside, there he was. Daniel in the doorway, not wet because he had waited for the rain to lighten, not impatient because he had waited at all. Do you have a minute? He asked. For you I have many minutes, I said. But we will use only the ones that belong to today. He sat at the table and placed a folded paper in front of him. There is a program at the port, he said. Training. Logistics certification. If I pass, I can move to planning and safety. Better hours. More honest responsibility. Honest is still a good word, I said. I need a reference, he said. Not from you. From someone who will tell the truth about me without painting it. Kellen said he would write one if you say he should. I did not expect the name to arrive like that. I felt the room shift by half a breath. It was not a bad shift. It was a recalibration. He has already written it, I said. He sent me a copy. It is exact. Daniel looked stunned. Then his mouth did a thing between a laugh and a prayer. Why would he do that? Because he saw you. And because he may have learned from a woman who expects people to do the right thing without applause, I said. Go ask him for the letter. Thank him on your way out. Mean it. He nodded. I will. He did not stand. He looked at the room, at the stove, at the repaired hinge, at the green notebook open to a page about rainfall. Do you ever get lonely? He asked. I moved the kettle to the back burner and turned off the flame. Lonely is a room with no furniture in it, I said. Solitude is a room where everything knows your name. I want solitude, he said. I have had enough of the other thing. Then collect names, I said, of things you can care for without asking their permission to love you back. He smiled. You talk like a gardener. I am one, I said. He stood. This time he did not ask for a hug and I did not offer one. The space between us was not empty. It was a bridge that did not need anyone jumping on it to prove that it held. At the door he turned and said, "Thank you for the part one see and the part one do not see." "You are welcome," I said. That evening, while the rain finished telling its story to the roof, I lit a small candle and carried it to the garden. I set it inside a jar near the rosemary and watched the flame bend and settle. A neighborhood cat came to the fence and studied me like a question it did not plan to answer. When I blew out the candle, the smoke drifted up like a thin line on a ledger. Then the night ate it in a single bite. 2 days later, footsteps on the gravel. I knew the pattern. Amelia again. Not at the side gate. At the front. She had come to read the sign. She stood there longer than necessary, hands folded, hair pulled back. When she saw me in the doorway, she lifted her chin, not in defiance, only to make sure the words came out clean. "I would like to ask," she said, "if I may come in for a minute." "Not today," I said. "Today the house belongs to rest." She looked disappointed but not offended. She nodded. Something steady lived in that nod. "Then I will try another day." "Try on a day when you bring nothing to trade," I said. "Only yourself." She glanced at the sign again. "I brought nothing." "You brought formality," I said. "It is very heavy. Leave it by the path. Come light." Her eyes warmed in a way I had not seen. "I understand," she said. "I think I finally do." She turned to go, then paused. "Thank you," she said. "For the casserole. You have better handwriting than the note deserved." "You are welcome," I said. "Warm it slowly. Use a spoon." She laughed, a real sound, and left. The gate clicked. The sign moved a little in the breeze and then decided to hold still. That night I took out the green notebook and wrote a truth that did not need polish. Today I said no to protect yes. The sentence did not feel clever. Felt like a map. In the final days of that week, I made a decision that had been pacing at the edge of my thoughts. I packed a small bag with clothes and a book and the photograph Daniel had brought. I left a note under the salt cellar that said 3 days. I will be by the water. Do not worry the house while I am gone. Then I took the early bus to a town farther down the coast where no one knew my first name from the paper, and no one knew my last name from anyone's mouth. I rented a room above a bakery. The bed was clean and loud when you turned over. The window framed a piece of ocean that belonged to everyone and no one. I walked along the sand and let the wind take the corners of my coat. I ate bread that refused to apologize for being bread. I read in a small park where the benches had been painted recently, and the paint still believed it would never chip. On the second morning, I woke before light and went down to the shore. Tide was out. Puddles had been left in the rocks like coins in a jar for the next child. I bent and touched the water and said thank you to nothing in particular. Then I said thank you to myself out loud, in a voice I would not have recognized a year ago. The word did not echo. It sank and fed something. When I returned on the third evening, the house smelled faintly of lemon and a little of Daniel's efforts with soap. The floor had a line of mopped shine that did not quite reach the corners. Progress. On the table a note. Passed the first exam. Kellen sent the letter. I start the training track next month. I fixed the cabinet hinge. See you this weekend. D. I opened the cupboard and touched the hinge. It moved without complaint. I closed the door gently. I went to the garden and stood by the gate and read the sign in the last light. Entry by invitation only. The words looked older, as if they had grown rings like a tree. Footsteps approached on the sidewalk. Slow. Not uncertain. I turned and there were the two of them together. Not side by side. Not holding hands. A pair of people who had finally learned the difference between company and crowd. They stopped at the fence. Daniel spoke first. "We were nearby," he said. "We wanted to say hello." "Hello," I said. Amelia looked at the sign. "Does the invitation ever come?" she asked, voice quiet. "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes it does not. It depends on whether the door needs to rest." "We understand," Daniel said. He reached into his pocket and took out a small key on a simple ring. He held it up and I saw that it was the one to the basement door. The one I had given him when he was 15 because I believe that trust is how a mother teaches a boy what kind of man he might be. He offered it to me. "I will ask to borrow it next time," he said. I took the key. It felt lighter than it used to. or my hand had learned how to hold it. There is a very good nursing home near the highway, I said, the sentence a mirror held up to an older version of a day. You should both try volunteering there. They need people who have learned to be careful with doors. Amelia blinked once and then smiled in a way that did not want to be seen, only to exist. We will, she said. Then this is your invitation, I said. Not to come in. To go there. They both nodded. For a moment we stood in a small triangle of evening, all of us listening to the ocean pretend to be constant. They said good night and walked away. I watched them turn the corner and did not feel victory or loss. I felt a gate close inside me without a sound. I went back to the kitchen and warmed soup. I ate standing up, not because I was in a hurry, but because a standing meal sometimes tells the body that it is allowed to keep going. After I washed the bowl, I went to the basement and took down the old ledger. I opened to the last blank inch of the last page and wrote the last line that ledger would ever receive. The house knows my name. I put it away and then opened the green notebook and wrote the first line of a new chapter. Tomorrow I plant sage along the fence. No one will see it from the street. That is not the point. I turned out the light and climbed the stairs. In my room the window was open and the curtains moved with the sea's breath. I lay down and closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time I slept without listening for anything except the sound of the garden learning the night. In the morning I woke to blue. Clean blue. A polite breeze moved the sign on the gate, and then forgot to move it again. Somewhere a child flew a kite the color of a second chance. It rose and did not snap its string. I made tea and carried the cup outside. The rosemary lifted into the light. The lavender spoke its soft insistence. I opened the gate and stepped to the path and turned the small wooden tag that hung beneath the sign. The backside had a single word carved into it, simple as bread. Welcome. Not for everyone. Not forever. For the right days. For the right reasons. For the people who arrive with empty hands and honest names. I closed the gate, set the latch, and walked to the soil with a trowel and a pocket full of seed. The garden received me. The day began. The story, which had spent so long practicing its ending, discovered that endings too have gardens. And I, who had once learned to survive by being silent, now spoke in the language the world had been using all along. I planted. I watered. I waited with dignity. I lived.